Chapter 5. You call it magic, Georgia said. I call it spooky. Well, whatever we call it, Annie said, is not getting the bills paid. Just then, Dorinda called us. Dinner, and hurry up. Do you think I slaved over a hot stove just to let the food go cold? She's sounding more like a housewife every day, Georgia said. Can you blame her? Annie countered. The meal smelled great as we gathered in the kitchen. Annie told us about finding her power, and Georgia told us about finding the note. It felt like Christmas, if a person were allowed to celebrate that holiday properly ever again. Could you set the table? Dorinda asked Robot Betty, who had wandered into the room. But instead of going for the silverware drawer, Betty picked up a dust rag and began dusting the stove. Never mind that, Dorinda said. Why don't you go watch some TV? Betty happily rolled out of the room. The robot loved to watch cartoons. I'll set the table, Jackie offered. What is this? Annie lifted the silver dome off a serving platter and sniffed. Turkey? How did you manage on such short notice? Dorinda walked to the counter and held up a long box that was lying there. It's not a turkey, not like one with legs and stuffing inside and things. It's this frozen, pre-cooked turkey loaf stuff that you reheat in the oven. She held up another box, this time a tall one, and I found this instant stuffing in the cabinet. You just add water and heat, no shoving your hand inside a big greasy bird. Who knew Mommy was cutting culinary corners? And the mashed potatoes, Annie prompted, passing that plate. Dorinda waved a masher in the air. Easy. Well, Annie said, it all looks great. Dorinda blushed, clearly pleased with herself. Perhaps, Annie said, one of us should say, Grace? Zinnia? We all bowed our heads over our clasped hands as Zinnia spoke. Thank you. She paused. Who should I thank? Thank the universe, Annie advised. Why not go for broke? At least you'll know you've covered everything. Thank you, universe, Zinnia went on, for this wonderful hot meal, and thank you for Annie finding her power. May we all find the other 15 items. She paused again. That's all, I think. Dinner was very festive that night for the first time since Mommy and Daddy's disappearance. Talk flowed easily like conversation. Juice boxes flowed like water. It was as though we were a real family once again, even if there weren't any adults in the house. Dorinda brought in the pumpkin pie and can of whipped cream. The refrigerator says we're out of whipped cream after this, she informed us, shaking the can, when for the first time Annie noticed a lone envelope beside her place setting. What's this, she asked. Another bill? I don't think so, Georgia said, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. One day soon we would need to figure out how to use the washer and dryer in the laundry room. I left it when you asked me to get all the bills because I was fairly certain this one wasn't a bill. See? The address is handwritten. I'm fairly certain they don't handwrite bills these days. Unless, of course, their computer broke down, Annie grumbled. But it wasn't a bill. It was an invitation. Will Sims is having his birthday party 2 weeks from Saturday, Annie announced. It's to be held at Kids Castle. This is just what we need, Petal said with a happy laugh. Something to take our mind off our troubles. I forgot Will's birthday was coming up, Jackie said. How could I? Never mind that, Rebecca said. How will we get there? It's miles away and it's still freezing out. If we walk, by the time we get there, we'll be popsicles. Never mind that even, Georgia said. How will we ever go to the stores to buy him a present? We can't very well arrive empty-handed. Maybe if it was Mandy Stenko we could do that, but not for Will Sims. If we can't walk, Zinnia said, how will we get to either place? We can't fly, can we? She turned to Annie. You have your power now. It doesn't by any chance include the ability to fly us places, does it? Just to humor her, to humor all of us, Annie gave a few feeble waves of her arms, as though they were wings. But flap as she might, she remained rooted to her chair. Sorry, she said at last, afraid not. Taxi? Jackie suggested hopefully. Perhaps we could call a taxi. If you can find a taxi that can hold all 8 of us, plus a driver, let me know, Annie said. In the meantime, however, that's no solution. Then we can't go, Petal said, tears forming in her eyes. Don't be ridiculous. The gentle hug Annie gave Petal was the opposite of her stern words. If we don't go, the only person he'll have there will be Mandy. And then what kind of party would that be for Will? But how will we get there? Marcia asked. Give me time, Annie said. You can't expect me to pay bills and solve transportation problems all in one day, but I'll think of something. A week went by. It was a week in which we settled into our new routine, letting Dorinda do our hair in the morning, eating breakfast she made, riding the bus to school, avoiding detection by the McG. Every Tuesday, red folders were sent home that contained important papers from school. Sometimes these important papers required a signature or even a call to the school from a parent, which Annie handled with ease. Annie was turning into an ace forger and impersonator. And the rest of our routine, playing, chores, homework. Sometimes we balked at the last, but Annie told us smart people had a greater chance of taking over the world than stupid ones, and we liked that idea. Plus, if we took over the world, we wouldn't have to go to school. And so we worked, ate, played, bathed, tucked one another in, kissed one another goodnight, went to bed. Then we got up and did it again. Amen. With Saturday came the sound of howling cats. They wanted to be fed. When we went to do so, we saw there was hardly any cat food left in the house. Almost out of cat food. We still need to get a present for Will and figure out how to get to his party next week, and soon we'll be out of human food too. Annie gave a deep sigh. There's only one thing left for her. She gave another sigh at the sound of loud, thumping footsteps. And would you please get down from climbing the walls, Petal? Petal was indeed climbing the walls, and she was doing it in her wall walkers. We'd each received a pair from our parents on our last birthday. The wall walkers were an improvement on the bouncy boots Mommy had invented, so that they could be used in any room in the house, not just the drawing room. They'd been too big for our feet when we first got them, but they fit perfectly now. The suction cups on the bottom sticking to the walls so nicely we could even walk on the ceiling if we wanted to. Sorry, Petal said sheepishly, coming back down. It was Zinnia's turn to sigh. I wonder what we'd have got for Christmas this year if we had gotten our presents. Another sigh. I bet whatever it was, it would have been really something. Disregarding this, Annie phoned information. He heard her ask for the number of Pete's repairs and auto wrecking. Goodness, she said as she waited for her call to ring through. I hate those automated voices they use these days. At last she was connected. Hello, Pete? Annie used her daddy voice. Robert Wheat here. Listen, I've got a problem with the old Hummer, a real sticky wicket. No, of course I'd bring it in, but the blasted thing won't even start. No, I don't want to call a towing place. They're all usurers, you know. Yes, I know it's Saturday, but could you make a house call? I'll pay double. What did he say? Marcia asked breathlessly as Annie hung up. He said he'd be here in an hour. Annie was clearly pleased as punch with herself, and he wanted to know why I called him old chap now. When the doorbell rang an hour later, Annie was ready. She'd prepared a blank check, signed it, and had it waiting on the table by the front door. Pete was everything you would expect in a mechanic. Incredibly tall, with pepper-colored mop of hair that had some salt dusting on the fringes, like snow on the sides of a paved street. He wore an old navy blue T-shirt that didn't fit properly. His large stomach played peekaboo over the top of his belt, to which were attached useful-looking tools. His boots had stains on them. Mommy would never let it inside. And his jeans hung so low that if he turned around, we could see the top of his bottom. Hey, Yates, he said, nodding at the rest of us standing behind Annie. We'd never been formally introduced, but we were the only octuplets in town, and everyone knew who we were, even if we didn't always know who they were. Is your daddy around? Pete had a nice smile, although there were lots of silver and gold fillings in it, and his eyes were dancing blue chips. As for his breath and general aroma, what can we say? Every time he opened his mouth to speak or moved a muscle, a wave came off him like the rubbing lotion Mommy put on Zinnia's chest whenever she got a bad cold. Of course he's around, Annie said with all the authority she could muster. He called you, didn't he? Pete couldn't deny that. But right afterward, Annie went on, he was felled by a terrible virus. It's true, Jackie backed up Annie. He's been in the bathroom ever since he phoned you. You wouldn't want to see him right now. And her mother's not here, Zinnia piped up. She's in France. Oh, Pete turned away. I guess I better come back another day. Oh, no. Annie said with a nervous laugh, reaching out to stop him. Why waste another trip? And here she picked up the check and waved it invitingly. When Daddy left you a blank check right here. Pete had been made to see reason. Fine then, Yates, he said. Lead me to the beast that doesn't roar. What's he talking about? Rebecca muttered. He means the car that won't start, Annie hissed at her. We led Pete out into the cold garage in Mommy's purple Hummer. Ooh, here are the keys. Annie produced some. Do you need them? Usually, Pete said, accepting Annie's offering. Thanks. As Pete climbed in the driver's seat, Annie climbed into the passenger side, indicating that the rest of us should climb in the back. Come on, Yates, she said. If we all watch what Mr. Pete does, then later we can tell Daddy all about how brilliantly he fixed it. As Pete proceeded to do something with the key, Annie proceeded to narrate for us, loudly. Now, Mr. Pete is putting the key in the starter thingy and turning it. At the same time, he's pressing his right foot down on the far right pedal. The engine roared into life. Huh, Pete said. It started right up. Nothing wrong with the ignition. No, Annie said nervously. I know. Why don't you ride around the block a few times to make sure there's nothing else wrong? I'm sure Daddy never would have called you if there wasn't something wrong. Before Pete could object to her line of reasoning, Annie pressed the garage door opener. Drive, Annie commanded. And drive Pete did. Mr. Pete is putting in something called R, Annie narrated when he wants to go backward. Now he's putting it in D and turning it around. He's still in D as he starts to go faster. He does a lot of spinning on the wheel and looking in various mirrors. When Pete needs to stop, he hits the left pedal. After going once around the block, we arrived back in our driveway. Well, that all seems easy enough, Annie let out without meaning to. Pete put the car back in the garage and turned the key again. To stop the car completely, Annie said, Mr. Pete is putting it in P, then turning the starter off and taking the key. Just exactly what is going on here? Pete asked. How do you mean? Annie asked, her eyes the picture of innocence. This car, there's nothing wrong with it. He may have had poor fashion sense and smell like rubbing lotion, but Pete wasn't stupid. Our father called you, didn't he? Annie laughed brightly, nervously. Give him the check, Georgia muttered. Right, Annie said brightly. The check. How much? Nothing, Pete said. How is that possible? Annie wondered. I can't charge you when I didn't do anything, Pete said simply. But you did something, Annie, said Annie. You drove around the block. Right, Pete said slowly. But anyone could have done that. Your mother or father could have done that. Except, Rebecca said, that our father's in the bathroom very sick. Right, Pete said, and your mother's in France. Pause. Then, can I speak with your father for a few minutes before I go? Jackie, Annie directed, go see if Daddy's free yet. Jackie raised her eyebrows at Annie questioningly. Now, Annie ordered. So Jackie scurried off. A moment later, we heard the sound of a toilet flushing several times, and then Jackie was back with us, alone. Sorry, she said to Pete, but Daddy says he's in no condition to see you right now. Again, the toilet flushed. How had Jackie done that? Has she rigged the toilet or got one of the cats to help? He's still busy. It could be contagious, Petal added seriously. We wouldn't want anything to happen to you, Mr. Pete. He looked at all of us closely. It was like he knew something was up but had no idea what. If that's the way it's going to be, he finally said. Then he reached into his tattered jeans and fished out a wrinkled business card. It said Pete's Repairs and Auto Wrecking and had a phone number on it. Look, he said, handing the card to Annie. If you ever need help with anything, if, your dad doesn't come back from the toilet or your mom never comes back home from France, give me a call, okay? Oh, sure, Annie said, but that won't happen. Everything's just fine here. Well, thanks. A few minutes later, we watched as Pete's van backed out of the driveway, and we all gave a collective sigh of relief. That was close, Dorinda said. He definitely suspected something. True, Marcia said. We've discovered a chink in our armor. When we're out in the world, we can fake things okay enough. But if someone comes here, well, we don't do so hot. We act too nervous. I can't argue with that, Annie said. But even though Pete suspects something is not quite perfect here, he doesn't really know anything. And besides, her voice trailed off. Yes, Rebecca prompted. Something very valuable came out of the day, Annie said. And that is, Rebecca prompted again. Annie smiled. Now we know how to drive a car. She paused and thought about it. Well, sort of.